Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Roberto Gonzales. I'm professor of education here at the Ed School and one of the co-organizers of the DACA seminar. Through the semester, we have engaged the campus through really all parts of the campus. The Ed School, over the yard, the law school, our Kennedy School, Divinity School, in a broader conversation about immigration reform, enforcement, TPS, DACA, the implications of these policies on young people, their families, community members, K through 12 institutions, higher ed campuses, and using the DACA wind down period that began with the session's announcement on September 5th. So using this wind down period, and also I think the popularity and visibility of DACA in the public eye as a way to build out a conversation that may start from DACA, hence the name DACA Seminar, but really includes a really array of issues impacting undocumented immigrants and mixed status families. The seminar, I should say that, so 20 events. So we've planned 20 events over this over this semester. Not a small feat, but it's been wonderful, and it's been really uplifting, the conversations that we've had over the last several weeks. This week alone, we're having 4 events. So we had an event on Monday involving Harvard employees who have TPS status. Just yesterday, we had a terrific panel on supporting undocumented students in K through 12 schools. This wonderful panel today, and Friday, we have a lunchtime panel at the law school, immigration attorneys thinking about litigation and kind of how should we be thinking and plotting over the next several months. Building up to, not as exciting as this afternoon, but a huge, big event on Monday. So Monday, March 5th, as many of you know, was the end date of DACA. I say was because of litigation, a number of court cases and 2 U.S. district judges who've halted the Trump stoppage of DACA. As we know that now that the DACA beneficiaries are able to continue to renew their status. So no new applications are being accepted, but the March 5th date is not as bright of a line as it once was. Nevertheless, the March 5th date marks the 6 months that the president gave Congress to act on immigration. And we want to point that out, that in this 6 months, right, while there have been opportunities, right, certainly opportunities and bipartisan proposals, that our Congress and our president have not been able to move forward this issue. And we want to punctuate that, certainly, on Monday. We also want to celebrate Monday as a day of action and resistance, because very importantly, and as we will discuss this afternoon, very importantly, while much of this story is told in structural terms, right, it's also a story centrally of agency and self-determination. We've certainly seen that over the last several years, particularly on college campuses and in communities. So I want to first thank our sponsors, the Harvard Graduate School of Education, the Inequality in America Initiative, Harvard University Faculty of Arts and Sciences, the Committee on Ethnicity, Migration, and Rights, the Charles Warren Center for Studies in American History, Harvard College Act on a Dream, Define American. And this afternoon's event is also being co-sponsored between the DACA seminar and the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at Harvard University. I want to thank my fellow co-organizers, Walter Johnson and Kirsten Weld, as well as Robin McDowell and Keish Kim, who are doing much of the heavy logistical lifting, really actualizing our kind of pie in the sky ideas about this seminar, really making this work happen. So again, as many of you know, on September 5th last year, just 6 months ago, U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced the end to the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. Right? A program that in 5 years had been able to move upwards of 800,000 young people. And I say the upper number. We've given up on about 100,000 in the media. People are now saying 700,000. But upwards of 800,000 young people got status through DACA. Right? So we're able to move 800,000 young people into new jobs. Young people were able to obtain health care as a result, driver's licenses, achieve upward mobility, not only for themselves and but also their families. The program, by most measures, is arguably the most successful program of policy of immigrant integration that we've seen in 2 to 3 decades. Certainly not without issues. DACA did not address a pathway to legalization for undocumented immigrant young people. It didn't address the exclusion from federal financial aid. And it is a policy that targeted a small segment of a larger population in need of relief. Nevertheless, a policy that has been very successful and overwhelmingly supported by the American public. So certainly over the last 15 years, we zoom out beyond DACA. Growing numbers of undocumented students have matriculated at colleges and universities across the country. While many students have benefited from state equity policies, such as in-state tuition and access to state financial aid, the implementation of DACA has provided a significant financial boost to students. And several states, campuses, and scholarship funds have opened up broader access to DACA beneficiaries. With the repeal, these gains appear to be in jeopardy for many young people. But higher education's role in supporting undocumented students predates DACA. So what are the lessons learned over these 5 years that can support students beyond this repeal? And what are higher education systems doing to preserve some of the gains that they've made over the last 5 years? We're joined by a very impressive panel of people that I hold in high regard. People that I know well and admire. To my far right, Maria Blanco, who's the Executive Director of the University of California Legal Services Center. Next, Monica Sibri, who's the founder of CUNY Dreamers in New York, and a really fierce organizer. And then Denisse Rojas, who's a medical student and founder of Pre-Health Dreamers. Denisse was also, many people may remember, testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee just a few months ago and gave a very powerful testimony. We will at some point soon, he's in transit, we will also be joined by Kevin Escudero, who's an assistant professor at Brown University. So let's welcome our panel. So my question, my first question, I think, to all of you So the termination of DACA has been really in the public discourse. It's been very central. This is an issue that shut down our government. It's an issue that until very recently has been really at the center of our news cycle really amazingly over the last 5 or so months. With the end of the wind down coming this Monday, and then I think after that, really ambiguity about the future of the program. How should higher education be thinking about this? Be thinking about kind of what's next, what they should be doing. How is this impacting students, college campus communities, undergrads, graduate students, students in the professions, in medicine, in law, et cetera, et cetera. And let's start with Denisse and work our way to the right.
Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. So I'll first just share a little bit more about myself and share more of a personal aspect in terms of the announcement. So I grew up in California. I was born in Mexico, and my family, we were all undocumented in the United States for a long time, and unfortunately my family, my parents and my brother immigrated to Canada after a lot of frustrations in the United States and not being able to have opportunities here. So for me, DACA was something that was absolutely profound in my life. I had thankfully been able to finish the university at UC Berkeley without DACA, and it wasn't easy. I had to work as a waitress and apply to scholarships and commute an hour away from school in order to make ends meet. And when DACA came, for me, that was like such a relief for me to be able to, and I fully felt the sense of coming out of the shadows and feeling like I could now believe in myself and feel like I could dream of higher education was a huge thing for me. And so now I'm in medical school, and that's been such an incredible accomplishment, and I couldn't have done that without DACA. And when the announcement came for me, that was devastating because, first of all, without a work authorization, that means I won't be able to continue my training and residency and beyond. But I also the sense of security of knowing that I'll have the ability to have a job, to provide housing for myself and all of that, and just to be self-sustainable. Now, sort of all of that went out the window, and it felt like this big question mark of what was my life going to look like, what was I going to do with a medical school degree and not being able to use it. And so for many other people in my situation, this has been extremely devastating. So as founder of Pre-Health Dreamers, I am connected to, I've really fortunate to know a lot of other people across the country who are in similar situations. And something that's been really devastating is to see people actually leave the country or their family members leave the country, like feeling like there's just, people are running out of options. So that's been really devastating, and it's also, I think, hurt many people in terms of their mental health. And I would say, especially with the back and forth over the last few months, it's like you think you're okay, and then you're not, and then you think Congress is going to pass the DREAM Act finally, and then they don't. So it's been a lot of back and forth around what's going to happen in the future. So I guess one thing I'll just leave for me personally is remembering that I've made it this far without DACA, and that I am a human first, and I have aspirations, and regardless of the status that I have, remembering that shouldn't define me, and I need to try to figure out how to move forward, whatever situation comes my way. So that's been at least one strategy that I've tried to use, is not sort of defining my life around DACA, but remembering, just simple things that I like to do and making sure that I'm happy.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. I hope you guys are awake. If not, I'm going to try to keep it very personal to connect with you, but also show you a little bit of what our story is like in terms of being undocumented with all these other immigration status, but also organizing within higher education. And so a little bit of my background too, I'm undocumented, so Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, does not directly had any kind of benefit on my end personally. However, as an undocumented immigrant who is organizing within the CUNY system to build CUNY Dreamers, which is a student-led organization of undocumented, DACA-mented TPS and citizens, a student-led organization of the CUNY system, the largest urban university in the country. What we do, and the students that we come to interact with are students who are directly beneficiaries of DACA, or are students who are, before they could have applied for in the future. So DACA had two big immediate impacts in the work that we were doing. One, it gave hope for students in terms that the legislation could eventually change the way that their lives were about to be in terms of work permits and all that. And two, for those that were already prepared, they were ready to jump on the work field. So our network, what we did was learn of all the resources that we knew of the scholarships and opportunities, and then prepare ourselves so then by the time there is a legislation, or by the time we are done with our years of education, that we can find a way to work in our field, regardless of whether you're DACA or undocumented. So when DACA came about, again, for us, it was just an easier step because our students had already their resumes ready, they knew the network, which now, thanks to DACA, is an extensive network within the 5 boroughs and now even nationally, because we have students that are working in the mayor's office who's now making decisions for, municipal IDs or all the kind of resources that they will get. So building and expanding the network. But in terms of higher education, the policies that we concentrated were a lot of how are these students being recognized on campus? Are they being coded as undocumented students? Are they being coded as TPS? What happens when a student is taken out of status? Because immigration is something that's not permanent. We know that, and the whole history of our country, that our immigration status, it's constantly changing. And so we have students who were undocumented when we started, who are now, thanks to DACA and all other processes that we can talk about more in depth, but they are now residents because they were able to, do advanced parole, readjust their status. And so how has the university played a role on that has been very key for us. But what is going on now and how higher education institutions can play a role, for us, it's really a wake-up call. We know that there are institutions that are looking at DACA as this big picture of, oh my God, we have the students on campus that we need to take care of. But there has been students on campus for such a long time. And so DACA and the noise around DACA, it's really helping us to create this conversation in the institutions that goes beyond just DACA, that talks about the TPS of students that they have, the undocumented students that they're prospectively going to have on campus because they're now, this opportunity of DACA is no longer in place for prospective students. And so for us, it's really more about, here it is, a big picture what's happening with one kind of students that you're looking at, but this should be a wake-up call for you to start being proactive in the policies and the programs that you're creating for undocumented students. And so just today, after our breakfast, I got confirmation of what the 3 actions should be for higher education institutions. So at the City University of New York, we're calling for 3 things. One of them is for continued legal services. So the City University of New York has the largest legal system that provides direct assistance to undocumented immigrants. So and I was telling her that I feel bad for those lawyers because they don't get paid enough. We need emergency calls sometimes at midnight, and we have the direct number of a lawyer that we can call to, and he will be there to help us. May not be right away, but he will be there to provide us answers. And then the number two is to create a scholarship that is directly going to service, especially those. So there is already, with the creation of DACA, you probably saw tons of programs that were open for DACA recipients, such as a national scholarship, which is the Dream.US scholarship. But what happens in that gap of undocumented students who didn't qualify for DACA, and the students who are now about to lose DACA, and the students who were in the age requirement to qualify for even the Dream.US scholarship, whether they're DACA or they're undocumented. And so we're asking for our second point to be a Dream Fellowship that will do three things: provide funding that will not be necessarily attached to tuition, because we know that housing is also a problem, food is also a problem, transportation is also a problem. Two, professional development. We know that all these students are coming in, graduate or undergraduate, still need access to work experience. Three, that it will be focused and providing them with a work experience that's outside of the campus. So not necessarily just come and receive training with us. We'll tell you about what's the movement, what's going on, how you can develop your professional agenda, but also placing them in different corporate or even like health. We're trying to figure out what that will look like. But to do all these 3 points, we're working with already programs that were created in the institution that serve citizens or people that have their Social Security. So we're not focused or doing work with one eye that says we got to serve undocumented students. We're saying we're going to serve undocumented students with these resources that are already in existence that we can use to form a new agenda how we serve them. And then 3, we're looking at a hotline. We know that now with everything that's going on, the mental health and stability of undocumented students is key. And at the City University of New York, we have one case that has not been made public, and we cannot because we respect the family too, but the person took her life. And so there was no one to help. She couldn't call anybody. So having a private hotline where they can call and ask for services, and we can then direct them to the proper channels, it's something that we're asking for. So those are 3 things just right away that we should be, that we are looking at expanding and fixing within the City University of New York. I have the help.
Okay. Oh, good. So I'll just want to comment about something, and then I'll say, I don't know why this is, are we too close together?
I think we're too close.
Yeah. You want to turn yours off and maybe, no?
It's not yours? No, turn mine
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's okay.
We're recording, so we need to.
Oh, we need it.
Okay.
All right. Let's
Can she use mine? Okay,
Yeah,
good.
let's just- We'll share. People share. All right, good. Thank you. See, that's the way it goes. I want to just comment about the last 2 presentations and then describe my program. I really am glad that we started out talking about the fact that the discussion has to be beyond DACA, and that actually the I don't know, I wouldn't call anything an upside about the rescission of DACA, but one of the things that has happened with the rescission of DACA is that at institutions of higher education that are now somewhat used to having DACA students and understand the services that the students need, the economic barriers, the need for legal services, the opportunities created by having work authorization, blah, 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 that now with DACA rescinded, all of a sudden the institutions that want to hold on to the students and want to continue to serve this population of students are having to figure out what that means if the person doesn't have DACA. And that's been really, I've seen that at the University of California. All of a sudden it's like, how are we going to have graduate students if they can't be TAs? How are we going to, are we going to have, should we come up with scholarships that supplement the scholarships that already exist if people can't do work, if people can't work because they don't have work authorizations, so et cetera, all of a sudden there's a conversation that goes beyond DACA about, in general, how are the institutions going to continue to open the doors, retain, and graduate undergrads, and how are the professional schools within the University of California going to continue to recruit and train and graduate and then hopefully place people that finish their professional schools. So I think it is very important to talk about this as undocumented students in higher education and not just DACA. So our program is a program that the University of California, I started it. It's an interesting, I will tell you the story because it's actually kind of fascinating. So the president of the University of California is Janet Napolitano, who is the former head of Homeland Security. His, boo, whatever, right? That's my boss. And and when she was named president of the University of California, there was huge outcry at all levels. Faculty, students, staff, at many levels. One, this was not a person that came from a higher education background, had not been an educator, and here she was coming to a very large public university system. Probably, I think it may be the largest in the country. I'm not sure if SUNY's bigger. CUNY, okay, all right. So geographically we're bigger. So, but
Had to win.
Right, but the other thing, of course, was that under her administration, during those 8 years of the Obama administration, because she only left the year before, towards the tail end of the 8 years, we had record number of deportations in this country under her watch and under President Obama's watch. Largest number of deportations ever in U.S. history. And the University of California students knew this, and the undocumented students at the University of California were particularly, well, angry is not even, doesn't even really convey it, because I'll tell you, we have clients whose parents were deported under that administration and are the clients of our legal services program. So you literally had people whose lives, had students at the University of California whose lives had been impacted by the deportations by the incoming president. So that was the background, and so she formed an advisory council on undocumented students to discuss, to receive recommendations on how to improve and how to, the life of undocumented students within the University of California. There were several recommendations, and one was to build, fund undocumented student programs at each campus with a budget for programming. The money was flexible. People could use it to do research grants. People could use it to put on programs. People could, it was, once it got to the campus, it was flexible according to the needs of the campus. And the second, one of the other recommendations was the creation of immigration legal services for undocumented students and their family members that attended the UC. She agreed to both, and I got hired to build this. And so now we provide immigration legal services to, we used to be called the Undocumented Legal Services Program, and we changed to Immigrant Legal Services because one of the things that became very clear to us quickly is that we had students that were documented but whose parents were undocumented, and for whom their parents' uncertain status and affected them as much as the students that were undocumented, their status affected them. these students were impacted by the fear and anxiety and stress that they felt about their parents' situation. So we broadened it, and we served the family members as well. We first started by hiring, we had a staff of 2 attorneys, now we have 9. And we were first going out to the campuses, setting up appointments. And at the beginning, I tell people we were doing the feel-good stuff. We were doing DACA initials, DACA renewals, advanced paroles so people could travel. We had a map where all the students that we had helped do advanced parole, Greece, Italy, Vietnam, everywhere that they had gone. Well, all of that came to, of course, a screeching halt. Not only way before the DACA rescission, even just after the election, our life changed. The character of the cases we saw changed. Now 40% of our cases are for family members. We now hired 2 attorneys who specialize in bond and detention cases. And we've had, I told Monica today, last night at 11 o'clock, I got a text that said, a student she texted me directly saying that her sister went in to do her adjustment of status at a immigration, and the interviewer at the U.S. Immigration Service said to her, I know you're married to somebody undocumented. That means you're harboring somebody. You better go home and tell your family to watch out because ICE is coming after you. And this was during an interview for naturalization with a U.S. Immigration Service officer. So it's like, it really, these things were happening were happening under Obama. I don't want to portray it as completely, an overnight reversal. But what is true is that the reach into all kinds of places where ICE wasn't before, the raids that we're seeing, because we're seeing in California, we're seeing workplace raids that hadn't happened for quite a long time. And then the way that the applications that we file for people, we do everything unaccompanied minors, we do U visas, we do everything, are being scrutinized with a whole different eye than they were before. And more people are getting turned down. So we really are seeing a new climate. The idea behind the program was twofold. If it really was not just to provide immigration legal services, the thinking is and was that we're fulfilling an educational mission. When you have students that are not only worrying about food, because a lot of the undocumented students use the food banks, and so there's tremendous economic uncertainty among our undocumented students. We have about 6,000 to 7,000 in the UC system. But when people are worrying about their immigration status and they can't even afford a lawyer, they can't afford food, they can't afford a lawyer. And our students are in places that are not LA or the Bay Area where there's nonprofits. We have students in Merced, which is the valley, in Riverside, which is near the Orange County. So they're all over the state in places where they can't access lawyers, and definitely not for free. That the ability to have a legal consultation that perhaps helps you, regularize your status, has a positive impact on people's ability to focus on their studies and to reduce at least one aspect of their stress. Now, there are many things we cannot do for the students. Not all of them we can end up finding a way for them to regularize. It's hard. It's not easy to do, especially since 1996. It's very hard to adjust your status if you came in unauthorized into the United States. But we see an amazing number of cases where somebody comes into us that never knew they had that option. The way that we now have the campuses at the campus level are buying into it. So our funding is not just from the president's office, but now from student affairs. And what we said to the vice chancellors for student affairs is, this is a student service. Just like you have all kinds of other services. You have centers that you fund for veterans. You have centers, you have LGBTQ, you have for this population, the sort of one characteristic is a legal one. And so for this population, if you want to provide a service, you provide legal services and these other wraparound services that you were describing, Monica. Other students need other things, but if you want to help, you have to understand what are the essentials for this student population. So now we've been able to get money from Student Affairs, and now we have attorneys at each campus, on site, in an office, full-time, instead of having to go out to the campuses to visit and make appointments. So yeah.
I noticed that Kevin has joined us, so I want to bring up, I welcome Kevin to our group.
Okay, we'll keep it there now.
We've got a handheld mic for Kevin, and so very sophisticated panel has already answered, I think, 2 or 3 of my questions. So it makes my job as a moderator very easy. But I wanted to pull back a little bit and ask really concretely. One, what were some of the gains, specifically, what were some of the gains these 5 years under DACA on post-secondary institutions, post-secondary campuses across the country? And 2, then, what's in jeopardy with the DACA rescission? And we can start with Kevin.
You can start with somebody else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe Kevin needs a while to get warmed up. Denisse, yeah, please.
So I think I can share specifically in the work of Pre-Health Dreamers, before and after, for individuals who had, completed, whether K through 12 school, high school and college, within a public education system, we were coming up to the professional school saying, it just makes sense to, and this is pre-DACA, saying it was more moral arguments around, you've already made so many investments, it only makes sense to continue, having folks go in through the education pipeline, and why sort of have your doors closed at this moment. And we really, it was really hard because I think a lot of the professional programs and even graduate programs, whether there's rankings have to do with how many people match into whether fellowships or other like residency programs. There was just this big fear that people would go through the education system or their programs and not be able to practice at the end of the day, and it be seen as this big waste of money and an investment in a student. And that was, honestly, it was really hard to get anywhere before DACA. And you had people who had gone through and had gone to professional programs, but a lot of it had been under the radar. It wasn't really, it was more of like the exception that someone had made it through. And so when DACA, had come, it was a real game changer in just saying, people have documents to say that they can stay in the country, that there isn't like this jeopardy of, them leaving halfway through the program, that people can have, work authorization. And we were able to take, at least in California, we were able to take just the argument around work authorization and say, look, people can now get professional licensing. People are able to, in some cases take out educational loans, and then came, other policies in California that actually give some financial aid to graduate students. But even around the higher education, a lot of programs need to have like TA positions and other positions to be able to complete the program and the qualifications. So the before and the after is really incredible. And so we were able to use those arguments at Pre-Health Dreamers and engage with the medical schools and other professional programs. And it is just absolutely incredible to see that within a span of 5 years. Now there's over 100 undocumented students in medical school and many in other health professional programs. And I don't think that could have been done without DACA. I think there is this just security around the program and just many other benefits that it brings, that it just really allowed schools to say, okay, we can consider this, we can learn about the program. And I would say the one big piece that really hasn't changed tremendously is financial resources. So that still remains a huge challenge, especially I think it's an issue in graduate programs across the board. I mean, there's just not the amount of resources as there is in undergraduate programs, but still, it at least allowed people to enter those spaces. And once you have people, once you have a name and a person who's been accepted to the program, I think it's a lot more easy to mobilize donors and other school resources to at least get students, some resources. And what is there to lose? So I think a lot of schools right now are asking, what's going to happen if DACA is rescinded, and how are we going to support students in the face of so much uncertainty. And I would say one thing that's been really powerful is seeing institutions of higher education send letters to DC actually saying and making calls. When I was testifying, one of the senators actually said, look, the president of this university has been calling me saying, what am I going to do with my students? You have to do something for them. So just I think in having more students be in these spaces of higher education, then you have the ability for a school to say, look, I have 40 students at my school, and have more leverage at least to make influence both at the state level and at the federal level. And that's something that I firmly believe in, is being able to be an agent. Like, for example, I think historically I've seen at least the schools say, look, we don't know what's going to happen at the federal level. We're not sure whether or not we should continue to accept students. But if you sort of think about institutions as sort of agents in this and say, look, if you have more and more students being educated, if you have more people going through the pipeline, and it just makes the program so difficult to take away. And I think that's why it took so long for the program for it to be in jeopardy, because it's been so successful, and at least up until recently, every effort to rescind the program hadn't gone through. And the fact that the lead plaintiff in the administration, or in the injunction, was the University of the California system, I think that just says so much about the agency that institutions have in being, not just sort of recipient. I don't know if this makes sense, but sort of seeing and watching what's going to happen at the federal level and then acting, but sort of the other way around is, standing your ground and continuing to accept students and support them. And you sort of have policy that you just hope that the policies follow. And so I think that's something that's, at least for me, a really important and key opportunity in this time. So I guess to answer your question is the schools have a lot to lose, and that's why I think they can be really powerful agents in moving the needle in the right direction.
Monica?
She won't give it back. Not true. I don't even know how to put it back. Okay, good. I can give that to So I'm going to talk with a couple of dates here. So 2012, DACA, it's comes forward, and it's a huge thing for undocumented immigrants. Some qualify, some don't. The immediate action for us was, for me, where I started, so CUNY Dreamers was founded in 2013. So for me, even learning about the advocacy work and what all these legislations meant, I started with deferred action for childhood arrivals because I didn't qualify for it. And so for me, it was, what do we do now regarding this policy that clearly will have an impact in people's lives? And how do we build in something that has to do with the institutions where it's technically our second home? And so what we did and what we saw immediately with DACA was people were able, again, to apply for a work permit. But in that sense of security, which sometimes you just say sense of security, there's no numbers behind it. The sense of security actually gave us those numbers. Why? Because now we were able to come forward, and I'm not undocumented, but people assumed that because I was in college and I was young, that I qualify for it. And so me being active and outspoken about this, although I'm not a recipient, gave me also sense of security. Mm-hmm. So we call it, for our little group and the network, we call it living in the shadow of the dreamers, but it's still being called dreamers. And so what we did was, find out what this meant, how we can benefit, and there was a network of legal support at the CUNY system that we immediately took advantage of. So undocumented immigrants were immediately applying through the legal services. And then we looked at what can we do that we have this sense of security that people cannot directly come and attack us because they don't know whether we qualify or not. They technically cannot identify us. And so 3 things that we went after was undocumented immigrants are often put as out-of-state tuition in our network. And so they were paying out-of-state tuition money. And so our point 1 Blanco, what we were going to advocate for was those undocumented students need to be given their money, not only for that semester, but retroactively if they were charged out-of-state tuition. So that campaign gave us more than $500,000 back to undocumented immigrants, some who had already graduated. Wow. I know, it was a big deal. And there were graduate students that were currently in graduate school and had already paid for that. We were talking about students of, $45K to $60K getting all the money back when they thought there was no future for them after undergraduate. Now they had extra money that they had been saving for graduate school. But that took, that sense of security is what allowed us to go into the university and say, this is something that is going on wrong, and we want to be at the table and talk to you about how we can fix it. And they were open about this. And then the other thing that we looked about the whole system and how they were serving undocumented students that took us a step back for coming forward was that the university released a memo saying that they were now looking at the federal legislation, you can say the number, 1621, that pretty much prevented the university from giving financial aid to undocumented immigrants. And so we came forward saying that we're paying activity fees, that money is technically our money too. Why aren't we getting stipends for the leadership positions that we're holding on campuses? You have undocumented students are, one, undocumented, and they're serving leadership positions because it gives them free Metro cards, or it gives them food, or it gives them books. And so that was a way for us to, survive in school, but now we didn't have the same benefits as everybody else in terms of the money. In some of the CUNY schools, we're paying almost $5K per semester that technically pay for us for one entire year of education. And so we went and asked them, why is that happening? It doesn't apply if our money, it's, cash, or sometimes we're paid, it's our money too. And they were like, well, we cannot separate which money is yours and which money is city or state money. So you technically cannot get it. And then the whole issue about, following the federal law. And so that took us backwards a little bit, but just about a couple months ago, with the new administration, the interpretation is that foundations in each higher education institution can actually give funding or create a scholarships for undocumented and DACA students. So not just DACA. So that's a new big step that our universities are taking on. And that's thanks to DACA, because it created a sense of security for people to come forward, but also because now these different foundations are starting to hear of these students, because usually foundations serve, the more vulnerable, the people that need help in their institutions. Now they're saying, oh my God, there's this big group of people that we have ignored for a little while that we need to start paying attention to. So they're putting money in there as well. So having that relationship and conversations with them has helped. Then number 3, it's the whole coding thing. Like, how do you know how many undocumented students do you have on campus? And is it good to have a code for undocumented students? Like, do you want to be, someone goes on your record and there's an extra L or C or something, and now it identifies you as undocumented. So big battle between, undocumented students who say yes because we want to know how many are graduating, who's graduating on time, who needs services, and then also, what if someone comes in and tries to get it, which was the case within for the municipal ID in New York City, when there was a huge lawsuit about them trying to keep the records of everybody that was applying. And so for us, working with the university was, we're not there yet. There's still a conversation that needs to happen, and there has to be a conversation that goes beyond just we get and we understand that these problems are there, but now with DACA going away, how do we make sure that we're protecting these students? And how do we know who are these students who are DACA recipients that could tentatively lose their work permit and no longer have financial resources? And one of the biggest thing that happened for us, besides, getting all this retroactive money, which was good, is that we had new people coming onto campus. People that never saw themselves in a higher education institution that were now coming into campus, and many of them with full scholarships. And so in 2015, we saw more than 375 DACA recipients coming into campus with full scholarships. And so that adds to the number that we had of how many undocumented students we have on campus. And so we know that for DACA to now be gone will create an entire systematic problem in the higher education institution that we're part of, because now where do you put them and how do you continue to serve them? So like national scholarships like the Dream.US has created a different application, a different process, and have promised to continue serving those students and paying for their tuition. But what about the ones that were coming in with small scholarships of different departments or different programs? It's like, how do we know who you are and what's your immigration status now? And that's where they are right now.
Yeah, this is really, I think this is a really important point, I think, to put a finer point on, and that is that under DACA, last 5 years, from state legislatures to more local policies to college campuses, documented students have made really important gains. Per Denisse, in the graduate programs especially, documented students have been able to attend graduate programs, to be able to take TA-ships, take RA-ships, and so that graduate programs are not as hesitant to admit documented students, that we have seen certain scholarships opening up to documented students on campuses. In terms of state legislatures, in South Carolina, for example, South Carolina excludes undocumented immigrants from their post-secondary system, their public post-secondary system, then passed a law to allow documented students to be able to attend South Carolina public post-secondary schools. In Massachusetts, for example, there's no in-state tuition in Massachusetts, but DACA beneficiaries have been eligible for in-state tuition. And so what we've seen, right, are gains made by documented students, but as I think, Monica, as you point out, that many undocumented students that weren't covered by DACA, in certain sense, fell further and further behind, right? And so, so how do we think about those issues? Potentially, if many of these benefits have been now tied to a DACA status, how do we, moving forward, if Congress cannot do anything, if things go bad in the courts over the next several weeks or months, and DACA is no longer a possibility, then what are the measures at the local level, at the institution level, at the state level? What needs to happen? What needs to happen to kind of make up for these benefits and for the tremendous loss that will occur?
And we were talking earlier about the fact that even, let's say for some miraculous reason, the court order stayed in effect and people were able to renew, and let's say there was a minimal thing in Congress which was to preserve DACA for those who have it, really minimal. The reality is that because now there are no new initial DACAs that can be filed, the population is this group is going to remain almost like this little group that had this, that will move through higher ed. And the next group, in 3 years, the people that would have aged in at 15, when they turn 18 in 3 years, they won't have any of this. So even we already are facing a situation where pretty soon we'll be back to a population that's graduating from high school and thinking about higher ed that will be completely without, that will be going at it the same way that people did before 2012. So it's really important that we think about what we learned from the benefits of DACA to push the institutions, because, and I don't have to tell anybody here, it's in the same family. You're going to have families, we see it all the time, that they will have a sibling that went through higher ed the 4 years with DACA and maybe even went to post-grad, and then they're going to have younger siblings that were cut off after the rescission of DACA, and that won't have those same opportunities, but will have the vision that their sibling did, right? Because they've seen their sibling be able to do it, and so it's really actually pretty urgent that the higher ed institutions start thinking about what does it look like to preserve everything that's been done, and it should not for DACA, but for undocumented students, and opening the doors to higher education. What do we do? How do they continue to do that outside of a DACA climate?
Yeah, that's right. So what are some of these things? So what needs to happen? Where do the conversations need to be moving forward?
So, okay, go. I was just going to say, this just brings back to something that I've been thinking about, and something that at least I try to do on a personal level is try to dispel this myth of exceptionalism around DACA. And I know, like, when I was accepted to medical school, and my school had previously never had someone matriculate who was DACA. And, when they talk about the program, they talk about me, and I remind them all the time that I qualified by a hair. Like, by a hair, I made it into the program, but I easily could have not made it into the program. And so from the beginning, from being a first year in medical school, I feel like I tried to educate the administration and letting them know, one, how that the program could go away, and that two, people who aren't part of the program, it has nothing to do with their merit. It really is, a lot of it has just chance, and when you immigrated to the country, or whether so many things in the record that could have disqualified you for not arbitrary reasons, truly. And so I think that's been really helpful, at least in engaging my school and other schools, is when they're thinking about, okay, what do we do now? It's not that, what are we doing now for these students who are exceptional and now, losing, status, but it is, okay, like, there was disparities to begin with, and now I feel like schools are now being, at least hopefully, forced to address, the fact that, like, now it's potentially a wider pool of people now that will be coming through their doors, but not having the same protections as before. So I feel like at least for me, it's been a lot easier to engage with schools who and individuals who have like an understanding and this just attitude of, it's not about exceptional students, but it is arbitrary legislations, giving benefits not based on merit. So I think schools need to, address specific issues that are people are facing. One is like the legal services. A huge one is, for me, mental health and addressing the needs in mental health. Financial services, making sure that, or like financial aid, making sure that, like, for example, the loans you're getting aren't tied to a service component. Something that my school recently did was, because there are folks who are taking loans, and we asked, look, what's going to happen if we graduate and we're not able to repay them? And they came back with us and said, all your loans will be forgiven if you're not able to pay. So they're having these discussions, and we're trying to engage as much conversation early on the earlier, and before we're having to make those decisions later. So those have been really important things that I think have been done, at least at the institutional level. But I think a lot of education and awareness, and for people to really stay up to date with the current news cycle, so that people, so that their students can be informed about anything that could be relevant to them.
Okay, go. No, you can go.
Can you hear me? So one thing I just want to echo is, like, I think what Denisse shared about the ways in which institutions can be agents for social and transformative change is really important, and holding those institutions accountable. So at Brown with DACA, what happened is that we had documented undergraduate students, but then the university started thinking, what if students want to stay for a fifth-year master's degree? What if students want to continue on for a PhD? And Brown was, I think, very welcoming in having undocumented or DACA students stay on, but also what if students were to go to Harvard or to go to another school, and what would that relationship be? Would those students also have benefits at that institution? And so having the leadership of these universities be the ones that are working with other leadership folks that are making sure that undocumented students or documented students have those benefits across the board. But also one thing that's happened in Providence is that Brown is a pretty wealthy institution compared to some of the other institutions in the state. And so students can come to Brown and be documented students and get financial aid, but if students go to another college in the state, private or public, they may not have those benefits. So what does it mean to statewide build a regional network where students at Brown who are documented students with aid are going to work with students at other campuses and building coalitions so that those campuses can also do the same at their university? I think has been really powerful in terms of building those networks. And in Rhode Island, we're a small state, and so it's pretty localized in a couple cities, but I know that those regional networks have been really powerful in terms of ensuring that what's a win at one institution kind of translates over to another institution, perhaps.
Can you guys hear me? It's good? Okay. So in terms of higher education institutions, definitely start looking at this beyond DACA. Again, this is an issue that affects lots of undocumented immigrants and immigrants that have several other status. In terms of also how they are fixing it and what language they're using, I think they need to start, every single university should have one point person that works with undocumented immigrants, period. I mean, this is like talking about an issue that, it's often being put into the international office, or it's being put into the diversity office, and it's not being put into its own entity, which it is its own entity, its own issue. It needs, a private center where they can talk about this. But then in terms of legislation, one of the things that we, when advocating in DC, obviously our capacity is very little, right? There's so much things that we're doing, not only as undocumented immigrants. I'm a recent college graduate, so my experience really now, it's like, what did I find after college? And we can talk more about it, but I built now New York Dreamers, which is addressing that gap of what happens to you once you graduate. But some of the things that we were fighting for in Washington was the age requirement, the age entry requirement for what this DREAM Act or DACA DREAM Act looks like in the federal government. And you can call their offices and they will tell you that we were bothering them every day. We were going there and talking to them about changing it. The current language says that DACA recipients are people who came before the age of 16. And so for us, and especially as someone who was caught on that timeline for 3 months, I said, but why 16? Where does this come from? Where is the reasoning for this? And they just literally didn't say anything. So I went down even to find the person who was behind advocating for this. And she's now an adult, she's a mother. And she told me, well, it was 14 before. And I think we even went for 15. And I was like, what made them decide for 16? And they were like, oh, that's just kind of what they said. And I was like, wait, why? So what we went back to DC was, we're going to support what the national organizations are doing, which is, a DREAM Act, a DREAM Act that will protect these 800K students that were already beneficiaries of DACA, but now also include 600 to 800 more that are people that didn't qualify, that came before the age of 18. So if you go back and look at the DREAM Acts right now that are being in discussion, it's on paper officially that says 18. It is no longer 16. Now that translating into higher education institutions, a lot of these DACA programs or DACA scholarships were created also for people that came before the age of 16. So if it has an age requirement, and if you see it, it says people that came before the age of 16. So now with this new language, these universities should change it and say 18. Maybe it wasn't passed at the federal level, but that's the new language that's been adopted, and now you have a way to fight that with them. The other thing is use the negative rhetoric at the national level and the inaction of Congress to advocate locally. There's lots of policies, like you mentioned, the State DREAM Act here, which will give, in-state tuition. And of course, we only have a limited amount of states here to talk about those perspectives, but there's lots of states that, does not even allow undocumented immigrants to be in a higher education institution. So that divide of DACA and non-DACA and what they're doing, I think we should take it back. So New York, so progressive, we don't have access to a tuition system program, which we contribute to. And so what we're doing now is using this negative message at the federal level and saying, you want to claim that you support immigrants, that you're an immigrant state, well, show it to us. Give us the DREAM Act that will give in-state tuition. And I feel like the letters from our higher education institutions will work even better if they are sending it to the state legislators more than the federal government, because they're not hearing it, and that's why we don't have that protection. Sanctuary cities, is it really sanctuary if you can still be deported? What is in place that they're in there that they're doing at the local level that we can actually be protected by? Lastly, I will say also own your work. Undocumented immigrants that are doing this work or that are helping higher education institutions figure out what they're doing. Creating a council is great. Are these undocumented immigrants being paid for their time to tell the university how to do their work? And so I only learned of it, please, I hope they don't fire me after this. I only learned of this when I got hired by Ignite. So I am the national program coordinator, and what I do is I train young women to run for office. Although I'm undocumented, I'm still following my passion because I figure out some in the way that I can create my own LLC, that I can work as an independent contractor, which are things that I wasn't being taught in school, or I didn't know, how to even walk around that process. Don't ask me the name of the LLC because it's just ridiculous. But through that is that I have now been able to sit at the table with the president, the vice president of these institutions where they're saying, we want to help undocumented immigrants. We don't know how. And I tell them, great, I can totally help you. How much are you going to pay me? Because this is my work. But then also bring people along. And what I said, it's great that you hire in administrators or, outsiders to come and help you figure out how you should do your work. But if you don't build something within the school or your own students, you're not going to have this forever. You need to, this is something that is changing every day, which is the case of DACA. Now, how do you find out, it's something that you need to follow day by day by day. And I was telling Maria over here that when you talk to undocumented students and when you are building curriculum and programs for them, you need to be watching the news with them. because everything that you built for them, if you set up an event like this today and we get a notice saying that there's going to be a raid around here, we're not going to come to you, we're just not going to do it. So all of that needs to be taken into account what you're doing. And so I told the university, you want to serve your students, you need to give me some money in that grant that will hire 2 of your students who are undocumented to get stipends or put it towards their scholarships so they can also be part of the process. And that's something that I will strongly recommend to everybody.
This is a great set of recommendations. I think that I would also add thinking about work authorization, driver's licenses. So there are only 12 states in the country that provide driver's licenses to undocumented immigrants. That's an area I think that right now that state legislatures we should be pushing state legislatures. California was innovative in passing a law around professional licenses that was not tied to DACA status. And so I think that is another potential opening. I would also say that as we think about higher ed campuses, they're not, this is not a kind of uniform set of issues and a uniform set of policies that govern the states where they live. And that is the point here is that in the absence of federal immigration reform over the last 2 to 3 decades, the last really 10 to 15 years specifically, we've seen a lot of action on the part of states and counties and municipalities, and really at uneven levels. So for example, what we're dealing with exclusions in southern states, in Georgia and South Carolina, exclusions from public post-secondary institutions, right? We're also dealing with exclusions from in-state tuition at other states, while states like California have in some ways surged ahead. And so as we think about this work, really need to think about the local contours. What are the local contexts that we're dealing with, and where are the fights, and where are the opportunities? I think especially if we see an end to this program, we're really need to be pushing people to walk the walk. Because I think that many university presidents have made public proclamations in support of documented students and undocumented students, but I think that really we really need to push people to really enact these agendas. Okay, so what happens all the time is that I've got like 5 more questions, and we've got like 8 more minutes. And so so 2 questions that I want to ask, and I want to ask one specifically to Denisse, and then the second to the panel, and I'll ask them both right now. Last night we had a K through 12 panel, and we had a documented teacher on the panel, and we talked about the implications of having, now really a couple thousand documented teachers in our schools throughout the country. Denisse, you mentioned earlier there are now somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 documented DACA beneficiaries who are in medical school. Med schools that have made tremendous investments, young people who've made tremendous investments in their time moving forward with dreams and aspirations. So for you, and thinking about the potential of thinking about moving forward, thinking about these next several months, years ahead, what does it mean? Right? So what's the importance of keeping these professionals in med school? And what are we looking at? Is it a possibility that all of these students who've gone through this training could possibly just have to start from scratch? So I'll turn to Denisse after I ask this last question for the panel. I'll turn to Denisse first. I think that certainly what we've seen over the last several years is most of the gains that we're talking about on these campuses, including DACA, right, have been earned by undocumented students, undocumented young people pushing, right? So looking ahead, right, where is there fertile ground to push, and what is the future of college campuses in kind of incubating this sort of this kind of spirit and activity? So first to Denisse.
So first of all, I think this has happened before, in that like there were a small number of people who had made it through medical school before DACA, and unfortunately did face the reality that there was no ability for them to continue. So I know some people, like one person did a master's program, other people, tried to find ways to stall almost. So that, I guess the very difficult truth is, without a long-term immigration remedy, or if DACA doesn't continue, or if there's no way to renew DACA, that puts people in very, very difficult situations. And I know this firsthand because of my own family, and my parents, my mom, who worked as a nurse, and E-Verify was becoming really prevalent in the hiring practices, and she unfortunately ran out of options, which is why she immigrated to, thankfully was able to immigrate to Canada. So I would say that puts people in really difficult situations, will force people to think about, alternative ways to make ends meet. Maybe some people will be able to find opportunities in other places. I think one really positive thing is that education is yours, and that won't be able to be taken away. And I've thought about, well, what if I'm not able to practice? What can I do with my medical degree? And, I've at least tried to tell myself that I'll have opportunities, that I'll be a U.S. educated, person with a MD behind my name, and I'll be able to, I just believe that I'll be able to do something with that, and I just can't believe that that'll all be in vain. So unfortunately, there are a lot of questions around what will happen in that case. But I at least choose to not think about that very often, honestly, because I have this motto of putting one foot in front of the other. And right now I'm thinking about how I'm going to pass this next test I have coming up. And then after that, I'm, thinking about, graduation and how to, so I feel like for me, what's really, really helped me is just thinking about the very short term and putting one foot in front of the other. And once I get to, that next moment is, when I start thinking about, legal remedies, other ways to find sponsorship. Thankfully by then, I will have hopefully the option of employer-based sponsorship, which is one way that people have been able to adjust their status, especially being a trained doctor. So, so there will be a lot of tough decisions. I think that it is absolutely absurd to think that all of these individuals who are trained won't be able to continue, and I think that is what is helping push for long-term solutions. I know, like Senator Durbin has frequently highlighted the stories of students at Loyola Street School of Medicine because I think that it shows a huge investment in their profession, and so I guess my answer is I believe something will happen, and I can't believe that all of this education will have been for nothing.
I think that's a good way to think about it. Okay, so with so in 3 minutes, let's see if we can get through the last question. A minute apiece.
The second one?
The second question is really, so how can campuses support undocumented students in their own advocacy and activism efforts?
Well, I'm probably not going to answer the question you asked, but
Okay, in
but
60
no,
seconds.
but this is. I want to say we just formed a working group at the University of California to explore alternatives to traditional work for students when if they lose their work authorization. And we have university people and advocates at the table and nonprofits at the table trying to figure some things out. And I think that the universities have to participate in this kind of thinking and actually take the lead in figuring out what they're going to do, as you were saying, with this set of people they've made an investment in. And, universities, when they want all to hire people, faculty or this or researchers or they have a powerful way of doing so. There's financial incentives, there's research opportunities, there's private dollars, all kinds of things that come to universities. So I think the universities have to not just leave it to the Denises or Monicas of the world to say, what am I going to do without work authorization? I think the institutions have to say, we've educated this group of people, and now we have to be part of figuring out what happens to our graduates, and actually really not think of it as an irritating problem that they have to deal with, but as something that they have probably the skill set and the connections and the money that they can figure it out.
Same, I would just say same. I mean, there's so much that they can do, but I would just take it back and again, just look at it from that perspective that this is a bigger issue than just DACA. It really is, and there are so many people talking about this. I think that they need to start doing this research and following the trend and seeing what's going on and implementing action. I think that these meetings, conversations are great, but if nothing's coming out of it, how is it that you're actually supporting? And in our issue, it's something it has a timeline, so we need to get things done.
I think I just want to echo what everyone else has said. I mean, I think it's really important. At our institution, we hired an undocumented student staff member who works with undocumented students and also first-generation college students. And while the populations aren't the same communities, there are a lot of overlap. And so having, I think, a staff member in a space and resources that don't put the burden on the undocumented students in order to be the ones calling for these changes to happen is really important. And I mean, it came from students. Our students delivered a report to our provost and asked them to do something, and then this is what came out of it. So it was still student-initiated, but I think making sure that those types of wins are built upon and also that the administration is continually asked to do those types of things.
Fantastic. I could talk about this all night. And then, this has been a tremendous conversation. Let's appreciate our panelists. We do have time. There is a basketball star across the street, but we do have time. Boston Celtics player. We do have time for Q&A if folks want to ask questions, and I would ask people to use the mic. I think that we've tapped out on microphones, but
Hello, and thank you guys so much for being here and speaking about these issues. My name is Margot. I work at Tufts University doing this work. And a question that I have is around engaging faculty and staff on this issue, specifically when it comes to trainings. Something that we have found to be difficult is there are quite a few faculty and staff who are passionate about this issue and want to learn and want to hear from our students. and then there's everybody else. And we can't mandate training, but would really like to find ways to impress upon our community that this is an issue that impacts a good amount of students that walk through the campus, and in having that conversation in a meaningful way. So any ideas or, trainings that you can recommend would be really helpful.
Do you have mandatory diversity training?
No, which is also on the, yeah. It's also a conversation that's being had.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thanks for asking it. I think, so I'm a faculty member at Brown, and we have this diversity luncheon series where there's trainings on LGBTQ identity, immigration status, first gen. And so we had one of the lunches that they do and trainings be led by folks that are at the first gen low income undocumented student center on campus. And so they led one of those. And I think we couldn't fit everybody in the room, so we had to do another one. So I think staff and faculty were really excited about it. Some of our staff on campus have DACA as well. So wanted to know for their own sake and for their own networks. So we did a lunchtime series, gave people free food, encouraged them to come, raise awareness, and that was pretty effective. But we also couldn't mandate it, so we just tried to advertise as much as possible. But attaching it to some type of like orientation for folks, or yearly, we also have a yearly training that happens called it's like a diversity curricular day, and so that was one of the workshops that was offered. But like plugging into those other pre-existing spaces on campus that people had already put on their radar, put on their calendars. Yeah.
I'm going to say if none of that works, the other way that we have built the space for them is they have annual galas, they have annual fundraising dinners and stuff like that. We just really try to work with the university administration to bring that conversation in there, and just having a flyer about it, having someone speak would also get a way for them to get engaged, because not every university has a diverse group of people. And I work, so part of the work that I do, and this is being recorded, I work with Republicans and Democrats. So like what I found out through that network is that to work with them, you really have to go to their things. And so once you start using their space and bringing your issue, it will really open up the conversation. You're welcome.
Yeah, and I would also point out that Margot and Dean Robert Mack, who's in the back, are at Tufts University, and Tufts over the last 2 to 3 years, just so we're learning from each other. We've got a wonderful talent in the room. Tufts has made really great strides, and in many, I think, specific ways is serving as a national model in supporting undocumented students. Just a few years ago, the president of Tufts, thanks to student efforts, was compelled to proclaim support for undocumented students, and what that support has meant, and maybe one of you can talk more about in greater detail than me, is actively recruiting a class of undocumented students, both undocumented and DACA students. And then, because it's a president's initiative, really from the president on down, administrative offices around campus have worked really hard thinking about how to better serve those students.
Hi, my name is Robin Johnson. I am here at Harvard College, the director of the Diversity and Inclusion Office. And thank you first for a great panel. It was very informative and inspiring too, I should say. I just wanted to share a note on the question from Tufts related to engaging faculty members in training and discussion. It's something that we think about quite often as well. And so one thing that I'll share that I think has been helpful and successful for us is that we are making outreach efforts and partnering in the way of building relationships. I think a lot of this work has to be relational. I was just before this meeting talking with another group of folks about other training initiatives that we're doing with faculty members and how important starting with that relationship building has been. once that has been established, I think what we've found to be really helpful is going to the faculty members and really tailoring our trainings to those individual departments. We recently went into the administrative board. Again, we went to them. We've gone to the dance department. We've gone to the sociology department. Again, going to them. It's very labor intensive, but it seems to work. Thanks.
And one more thing. One thing that I think all these suggestions are really wonderful. One thing that we've done on campus that I think has been pretty effective is faculty fellow positions. So at our Brown Center for Students of Color, at our First and Low Income Undocumented Student Center. So there's faculty fellows that are there that do programming and collaborate with students. And then faculty say, oh, I see you're working with that center. And what do you do? And what's the center about? And so you can see that your colleagues and your peers are the ones that are engaged and then can be the ones that while you're having a meeting or before a meeting can talk about and fill other people in about those issues. So I think going to those spaces too is helpful.
And I am going to add to one of the things that we used was we brought a speaker that was, I didn't even know who he was. He was connected to some technology that the one of the universities really focus on. But he was like the person that they all admired, they all wanted to hear from. But then we brought him and we asked him to talk about, the issue. And so everybody was in shock that a guy like him was talking about immigration. But that got them connected and really, they were paying attention to the conversation. They weren't just forced.
I would add also that for many campuses, this is really kind of starting from very kind of early stage. And so I think that some of these approaches that have been mentioned, I think, are really effective for kind of moving this conversation forward. But I think that what campuses want to work towards certainly is moving away from the kind of one-off training to developing a series of trainings that, in service to building a viable network, right, of faculty, of staff, of students, and also outer community members who can work to really provide a very large menu of services to students and can be really undocu-friendly spaces.
Hi, that's loud. Okay, so I'm Lindsay Laguna. I'm an alum of this grad school, and I actually work in the Career Center at Wellesley College now. Thank you all for being here. This has been just very informative for me because it'll be a new role within my office where I'm going to be a point person for DACA and just related issues. And so I'm excited. I feel like there is at least going to be some institutional progress made where I am. With that said, even though I know I'm going to be the point person, I know that these students are already here or at my institution. And, I'm just thinking that, yes, I'm looking forward to institutional changes. At the same time, what can I and my colleagues do to what can we do to show these students that we're accessible? Because, there are some students I've met with where it's had to take a few meetings where then they maybe let their status out to me, or if it's not them, like you've all referred to, like mixed status families, maybe, a student that I've seen, at least 20 times, only in recent meetings has talked to me more about her mother's status. I try to make myself as approachable as possible, but what can, educators in general do, just especially if we're still waiting for those institutional changes to come?
Well, I go. You have to work for it, for sure. I felt, when I started CUNY Dreamers, it was 17 people, and it took almost half a year to get them into their room because they don't trust everybody that comes forward and says, I want to help you. You have to show them that you're actually doing that for them. So really build on this pace in your office. Your office has to be very visual, talking about, bringing more people along, very visual. Put up the signs that you think will connect with people, use the right language. You need to be aware of the language. You cannot use the word illegal. You got to also not be educating yourself while talking to them. So, what does Dreamers stand for? What does DACA stands for? And when you're talking about your office and what your office will be doing, if it's only DACA, then say and present it that way. But if it's to represent and provide services to immigrant students, say that. So then when they hear you, that's why they will come forward. What I just heard from you was DACA, and I'm probably not going to go to the office because that's not something that directly will help me. So the language is key when anyone tries to bring the student to come forward to you. And then the other thing is you got to build leadership. Undocumented students learn and know about resources because we talk to each other, and I call it a big gossip around us. If something goes good, everybody knows it. Something goes bad, everybody knows it. So if you know someone on campus already, have that person talk about your office, and it will naturally come if you're actually providing the services. It's just at the beginning, it will be, as anything, a little bit hard, but use the other departments to promote your work. And something that we did was just to stand outside the campus and give out candy, or even if you have enough funding, especially here, I'm sure you will, access to the metro or something, a pass, and students will start coming forward to you and people will talk about the services that you're providing.
And I think that for us, it didn't take us long, because I think when you provide legal services, it's a faster curve. But the thing is to work very closely with the existing organizations. It took us 3 years to build what we had. If there hadn't been existing strong undocumented student organizations at each campus, we would probably be another 5 years away from being where we're at now in terms of like the number of clients, the number of attorneys we have, because of this word of mouth issue. But also if you have a student group on campus, which I don't know if you do, that do you know?
I mean, generally there are definitely student groups that work on immigration issues.
Yeah.
And at marches, some of them have been very vocal about their specific,
Right.
like undocumented or DACA, however
Right.
they choose to categorize. But I don't know if it's like
Right.
specific.
The reason I ask is because I think in the beginning, at least, this is what's worked for us. All the programming, all the outreach, everything, I was like tight at the hip with the undocumented student programs. Not just, one, I had to learn that world, and I couldn't have, our program wouldn't have been accepted if it wasn't accepted by them. So the first thing is you have to figure out the way to not just get people to come to you, but you have to get people to trust you personally by knowing, by reaching out, knowing the issues. So I think you have to make the connection with the student organizations. I just don't see any way around that. Even if that takes up a big chunk of your time, I know it did for me. There were campuses that were very tough, like UCSD, where there were the students weren't out, but I had to find them. So I think you have to connect with the student or activists. I do.
But also get validated by the right people. So I would just say, take a picture with Roberto later and put it up. And I mean, I'm just saying, it is true. Your associations will be key in building the trust with the students.
Yeah, and it's not a case of if you build it, they will come. That you really have to work for it.
Just to add, some things that were really, really helpful for me is like, I don't know if you'll like be sending newsletters or like, I don't like.
A lot of it is to be determined.
Okay.
Oh,
So,
that's great.
so even like the like information that you share, like say, because I imagine you serve like, a lot more individuals. Like, I think something that was so frustrating for me was always getting these like, NIH funded, program, and then they would send it out to all the students, and I would just delete. I would delete like so many emails from like all these offices, because I just like assumed none of them, I was ineligible for any of them. So I thought something so powerful is that like you can say like, actually be really intentional about the language, and you can say like this is only for, even just like working hard towards defining the eligibility and like and cutting down all the work for the students, saying, you know, this is our list of summer programs open to undocumented and DACA, or this is only for DACA, you know, like just doing all that work, because I think that, like, it's so funny, like, I remember like when I, you know, really, like when people would just say like something like AB 540, I'm like, wow, like, you know that word. Like, so for AB 540 is like the in-state tuition in California legislation. And so, I mean, just using the language and knowing, like, I think, you know, once you have people coming to you, they will know that you're invested in the program, or like in them, by you know, just the resources that you know about, and just the knowledge that you have, I think, and cutting their work in half, and that'll be huge, I think.
And one thing we've done on our campus, it's a smaller campus as well, is this faculty, or it's TEA, so it's like tea and coffee or drinks with, and food with faculty and administrators. And what's your story, and why are you interested in this issue, and how did you come to this? Why are you an academic, or why are you an administrator? And it was really effective in terms of cultivating that trust, just sharing a meal together with the students, and kind of being a little bit vulnerable and opening yourself up to that. And then, I mean, our campus is pretty small, and so, well, on the smaller side, and so I think it was pretty effective in terms of giving people the opportunity to like meet face to face with somebody before they would have that meeting, which is like, I have a question about what DACA means for you know, this career application or something like that.
We had a question over here.
Hi, my name is Magali Flores. I am a student at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. And first of all, thank you for your time and your insights. I'm very happy I was able to make it. Shout out to New, who kept publicizing it at the School of Public Health. But so there are a lot of like educators and administrators here that have asked questions. My question is for Monica, but also anyone else who wants to chime in. But how much, I mean, the amount of victories you are able to vocalize, like, it's just amazing. And I'm just in awe with that so much can happen within, you said, just your 4 years at the institution. As a student organizer, you know, I was an organizer in undergrad, and trying to organize groups here. It's a little bit difficult for grad school because the turnover at the School of Public Health, at least I'll speak for our school, it's very quick. For some students, it's 1 year, and for me, it's a year and a half. So out of all those victories, like, how much was it organizing from the community support, and, you know, within the student support, and how much was it working with the institution? Because I feel that at Harvard, it's very different. I went to undergrad at UC Berkeley. Yeah, go Bears. Harvard, there's a lot of like institutional support, and like, which appears to be open-minded and receptive, but at the same time, like, sitting on student task force, you kind of are talking about the same things, and I ask myself, when is it going to move forward? Like, when are we actually going to make change? And part of me is because I'm impatient, but part of me is also like wondering, how did you get all those victories? How much was it actual organizing and working with the institution? Because we need that insight now.
Well, you're such a rebel on that rebel. So, I mean, I think this is why I should write that book. I do not like writing, and how to organize as a young adult. Really, something that I learned so early in just building CUNY Dreamers was that I couldn't do things alone, and I needed to work with someone who could. And so for me was finding that person that could review my writing at all times, because I don't like writing. So finding your weakness, that's number one. And then two, really start looking at who's making those decisions in your administration. If you feel like you're at the task force, great, be respectful, stay in the task force, because you need to build those partnerships and relationships too. But then jump it and find the person that's making the things happen for you. And don't go and just ask for that. The problem, and I'm going to share a very big example of what happened recently at one of our local universities. The student there was a group of students who created a video about DACA, and they were very vocal, but the video said the wrong things. The video had people arguing about why immigrants should be ashamed pretty much of being here undocumented, and the person who was saying it was undocumented himself. And so it was the first time he was coming forward. He had really bought into that idea that being undocumented, it's a problem. And he didn't use the word undocumented, he used the word illegal. So very, very, very bad video that's still out there circulating because social media. And the administrators and the undocumented led organization on campus, the local one, said, we need an apology. We want you to apologize. So they started this whole campaign on social media. So I knew the people that could directly, have a say in that. I emailed them, reach out, we'll schedule a meeting within 2 days. We sat down at the meeting. I was very confident that the student knew what the student wanted. We come in and then they're saying it's not okay what happened, but they didn't have an ask. And then their ask was, we want an apology. Okay, the administrator said, how do you want the apology? Do you want it in writing? Do you want it publicly? How do you want it? And the student didn't know how to answer. So when you're going into these spaces, especially as young adults, and as a young woman, and assuming that you're here also trying to work and be in school, or I don't know what's the regulations in graduate school. I'm just about to go into that process. But there are limitations for you as a person too, and when you're coming into these spaces. So acknowledging that, knowing where you want to ask and going through the right channels, and you have Roberto here who I'm sure knows exactly where to go and getting some things done, really go straight and ask. If you don't ask, you're never going to know whether you can do it or not. And then to build those relationships or find out and understand who is making these changes happen, you really need to be active. You need to go to almost everything that they're doing. I mean, I went to boring college council meetings that I had no idea what they were talking about, but I sat there and I paid attention to who was speaking the louder, who was, taking notes, who had access to the funding. Whoever has access to the money is the one that has a lot of power in the room too. I know it sounds so simple, but it takes time. I mean, really, you had to build the relationship with all these people.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have time for one more question if anybody has a question or comment.
I think I'll just add a little bit more.
Yeah, sure.
I think so that I would say knowing exactly what you want, and like for example, for my school, after the election, I really wanted them to come out with a statement, and so then I went and I found all the other statements coming out from the University of California system. I also peer pressured them. I was like, look, Brown sent a statement, all this, and then I sent it. I said, I think this is a good idea. I would feel really good about this, knowing that I'm safe here, and I sent it to the right person who was the dean of the school. And I also sent it to a few other people who I thought would be influential. They didn't get back to me within a month, and I was like, okay, it's it's the winter break and they're all on vacation, and January came around and I sent them a friendly reminder, and I sent them another reminder until they it just came out one day, this is I thought it was really amazing because they also talk about protecting the patients at the hospital, and not allowing and actually I also took that from the University of California statement that came out. So for me, moving forward, knowing who the people that are making the decisions, but also sometimes I think if you can show them exactly what you want, and other schools have done it or are doing it, a little elements of peer pressure, elements of going to really boring meetings. I would try to show my face at things, even just trying to network and show my face, show that I was invested, show that I was an active student. I think all those things really helped me. But it is pretty consuming. The last thing I would add is I think it's always important to represent the voices of whether it's other undergraduate students, new, and making sure that I guess many voices are represented in whatever thing that you're asking for.
I'm going to add this because I'm sure it could be very helpful for somebody else, but I remember meeting with this friend I didn't even know, so that was key for me. I went into some of these spaces not knowing who was in the spaces, and so it was really bad for me to be talking to one of the vice chancellors and not knowing who he was. But that ignorance sometimes could be very helpful for you because you can really openly talk and not be so afraid or shaking like I was after I figured out that that was something that I needed to do. But this administrator said something very important to me, and adding to what Denisse just said in terms of bringing more people or more stories or voices to the table. He said to me, well, you know, I usually talk to students, but I don't see active students that are bringing, you know, other people with them. Since that day, every event that I went where he was, I took 5 to 6 other students with me. And, you know, sometimes it caused me to get them there, but that's where I think this other part of how to organize as a young adult comes into place. Like, you need to be dressed accordingly. You need to find